I'm Mojisola Adebayo, and my question is, how do we research, make and tour international performance and art about climate change without contributing to its causes? How far is art worth the damage?
Okay, well, my name's Dan Gretton. I'm a co-founder of Platform, and we've been going for 25 years now. And we work in the triangle between art, activism and education. And the particular two projects I've been involved with in the last sort of 5 or 6 years are Remember Saro-Wiwa, the project to the great Nigerian writer and activist Ken Saro-Wiwa, to get a memorial for him in London. So there's a big campaign about that going on at the moment. And the second project is The Desk Killer, which looks at, I suppose, what you could call the psychology of bureaucratised killing, or white-collar killing, looking at people in organisations, people in corporations particularly, and that's becoming a book at the moment after many years of research. Mojisola's question to me was, how do we research, make and tour international performance and art about climate change without contributing to its causes? How far is art worth the damage? And I suppose I had a couple of reactions to that. The first one of which was, I was a little bit uncomfortable with the implication that artists somehow have a special dispensation. And it was almost implying that, you know, in a way they've got rights that other citizens don't have, which did make me feel a bit uncomfortable. It was a bit too close to the idea of the environmentalists, you know, jetting around the world for a weekend conference in Australia on climate change, you know, and we're so important, we're saving the planet, you know. And there's a term that I've used sometimes, which is the narcissism of frenzy, that sometimes people get caught up with. But thinking a bit further, I think the implication of the question is really looking at the specific and unique role that art can have. And that, to me, is really fascinating. Because I think we live in a time where, rationally, everybody knows, I mean, all the scientific data is out there, we've had all these reports. Everybody knows the critical issues to do with climate change, but it's basically has stayed at a kind of rational level. And I think the great challenge in the next years is going to be connecting that with the gut, because that's where change really begins. And I think that's where art has an enormous role. And we've sometimes used this phrase in Platform about trying to connect the frontal cortex and the solar plexus. And that's where I think art is absolutely critical. Yeah, on the issue of travelling and moving around, I suppose, I had a few thoughts there. The first of which was really that there's something paradoxical in the world we live in at the moment, which is that there's this illusion of connectivity. And we think sometimes that technology has given us this new way of communicating. You know, we can Skype each other, and there's Twitter and Facebook and all these technologies. And yet my experience, and I think the experience of quite a lot of people, is actually people have never felt less connected in a strange way. And so to that extent, I think that to meet people in real places, in real time, and have that kind of eyeball-to-eyeball contact has become more important, if anything. The last thing, which is maybe obvious in a way, but I think it's worth saying, is that we've always attempted to work in a very long-term way on issues, and we've now been working on questions about the oil industry and the human rights impacts and the environmental impacts of the oil industry we started that in '96, so now 13 years. And I think that something happens after a certain amount of time. I mean, whether that's 5 years or 10 years, but you certainly get to a depth of working where you're then beginning to have, I think, real political efficacy, and there's a real power to the work that you can do. And I think so much of the world that we've grown up in terms of, you know, the capitalism, I suppose, it's emphasising the short hit, the quick turnaround, you know, on to the next subject, 3 months, 6 months, move on. And I think if you subvert that, I think something remarkable can happen. Right, well, the question I had starts with a quotation from the German writer Rilke, which I've always found very interesting. I've often asked myself whether those days on which we are forced to be indolent are not just the ones we pass in profoundest activity, whether all our doing, when it comes later, is not only the last reverberation of a great movement which takes place in us on those days of inaction. And then the second part of my question is, in the light of increasingly apocalyptic forecasts about climate change and an understandable tendency for many of us as artists, activists and educators to react to this changing reality by mirroring it with increasingly urgent and sometimes apocalyptic language, for instance the recently released film The Age of Stupid. In the light of that, how do you respond to Rilke's question? Could you talk about the role that slowing down and reflectivity plays both in your creative process and your interaction with your audiences?